with Louisville's own Stephen Gaghan, Oscar-winning Stephen Gaghan. So we'll get him on here in just a moment, but a huge thank you to everybody who has been tuning in and supporting LFS's Filmmaker Forum. For those of you who are tuned in on Facebook Live, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and starting a watch party or sharing to your page that you're watching this, we have found that it helps alert other filmmakers and film lovers that we have this going on. And we love to be able to spread the love and spread the information, and find that a lot of people have been inspired by our past forums. So I'm sure tonight will be no exception. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on Stephen. Here we go. Bringing him over. Unmute. Ask to start video. Let's see. Okay, there he is. All right. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Beautifully. Maybe just can come a little closer. I can almost hear you perfectly.
Okay.
Love it.
Hold on one second. Let me shut this other door.
Oh, so we don't hear too much of the waves crashing in the background? Make us all jealous in landlocked Louisville?
Well, yeah, it's a quality problem.
I know, right? Difficult. So earlier today we did a little bit of a tech check with Stephen, and I could hear the waves rolling in, and can't think of a better office from which to create all of your beautiful work. So thank you so much for joining us tonight or this afternoon on the West Coast.
Afternoon, my pleasure. It's 3, and glad to be here. I love Louisville Film Society.
Oh, well, we love you. We had the pleasure of doing a sneak preview of your film Gold a few years ago. We had a packed audience for that. So a huge thank you, not only for supporting the Film Society, but for continuing your relationship with Louisville. I know you were also honored at the award in the arts for the Fund for the Arts here in Louisville. So it's always a treat to have you coming back home, but it's really an honor that you have maintained your relationship. So do you find yourself still coming back here often?
Yeah, all the time. You know, particularly my my parents are, you know, in their 80s, and so there's always a health issue, and so it seems like I'm back. I mean, I come back a lot, but it seemed like until COVID it had accelerated. So I was, you know, spending just a lot of time there. But I love Louisville and I love being there. So it's really where I feel like, you know, it still feels like home. So.
Absolutely, we love that that you come back, and that so many filmmakers do still find this a place to call home, no matter where their experiences and professions take them. Last week we had Bradford Young, who is a Louisvillian as well, and he lives in Baltimore, and he speaks about how important his roots are, being here in Kentucky and taking that with him where he is now. And do you find that that's the case? Is there a little bit of Kentucky in you when you just kind of in your everyday existence? Do you know that some of the pillars of who you are relate to being from here?
I mean, unequivocally, you know, where you're raised is like, I mean, I'd say all the pillars, you know, they were all put in and they were all installed in Louisville. And you know, just say for a second, I'm a huge Bradford fan, so I'm psyched you guys had him. I'm like, he's gets the big genius award. He's a total genius. Something in the water in Louisville, man. I don't know, but you know, I'm still friends with the people, you know, who were my friends at my 4th birthday party. So I come back and I literally will go have brunch on Sunday or get coffee on Friday morning with 5 guys that I knew when I was 4 years old. So we've been friends for 50 years, you know? And so I think that Louisville just, you know, it breeds that kind of, you know, just real relationship, you know, that actually as you get older, those are the relationships, you know, and I don't see them every day, but I feel as close to them, if not closer than the people I see every day in LA. It's just like, it's like an ongoing dialogue, you know? And yeah, I feel really lucky. I mean, my wife and I, we talk about it all the time. We're constantly looking at like Zillow in Louisville and like looking at, we should come back there, and like where would the kids go to school? And like, we always have this escape LA fantasy, but
Just don't turn your camera and show what your view is there.
I,
That would be pretty hard to leave.
it's, I literally have a private right-hand surf break like right there. So that's the one. You got to get an ocean.
Yeah, right. If we could just get an ocean here, and we had our film incentives for a little bit. Hopefully those will be coming back. If we could just bring an ocean in for you, then it's locked, right?
I know. I think the film incentive, I hope it comes back.
Here's hoping we can all push for that once our priorities shift. Right now, we have a lot on our plate to be taken care of in many capacities. So hopefully we can go ahead and attract some of those incentives back. But what I would love to do is get started with a little bit of your background, and then we have some participants that are on here that would love to come on and ask you questions themselves. But something that I would really like to know is, we do have a lot of creatives that are here in Louisville. Some of them have left, some of them stay here. There are a lot of people that are burgeoning artists and storytellers. Can you tell me a little bit about your background here, how it was influenced by Louisville, by your travels, and how you basically set off to become a storyteller?
Well, I think when you grow up in Kentucky, you love to read. I think you feel you feel the Southern literary history, kind of around you. Grew up in the same neighborhood as Hunter Thompson, who I really think was a great writer. And, and he also was kind of a wild man. He loved, he could drink and he could write. And I looked up to him. I admired Hunter Thompson, like from the time I was maybe 13 or 14. And I could ride my bike by his house, and I think that that's around us, and, at a certain point, you're kind of moved to try to emulate it. And I think Louisville, which is a thing that makes it unique, is, there really is an art scene. You have whether it's the Humana Play Festival or the great music scene, you could see like the replacements, on Bardstown Road, and just like your favorite things, you constantly exposed to great artists, they're coming through. And so it's kind of in the water you're drinking, in the air you're breathing, and, furthermore, I think Louisville has a really interesting, obviously it's really fraught political time right now. One of those inflection points, for democracy, it feels like. And, but we had the busing, I went through the busing riots and, the busing protests in 1973, and I just think there was a kind of liberal political consciousness there, that it's real and it's profound. We had that great federal judge, Boyce Martin, who was so instrumental and so progressive. We had the amazing newspaper, the Courier Journal. And I think that I wasn't aware of it. I just was running around getting in trouble, I would get arrested. I got kicked out of high school. My poor mother basically is what we should all be saying. But while all that was going on, this other really great thing was obviously happening, which is like, I started to think that I had a real voice, and I started to take my own voice seriously, because that's like a really big deal. You've got to believe it's so related to what's going on right now. But I wrote Traffic in 1999 or 98, 99. And, I was really looking at the war on drugs, which was, militarized policing and putting military style budgets into into law enforcement, into interdiction. And, to believe that you could go out and say, I'm going to make the definitive, or what I felt like was the, definitive statement about that. You have to have some kind of faith, and it because otherwise, why me? How could I do that? Little Stevie Gaghan from, Cherokee Gardens, who would listen to me, but because of all these things I'm talking about that are still there, it's the same. you can go see a band that's like a new band that inspires you. You can, go hear a talk. You can go to the Center for the Arts. You can go see a play. You can, I wish the Vogue Theater was still in business, but anyway, you know what I'm saying. And so, another thing was like, nobody ever said you can't do this stuff. That's the other thing, is that there's, I think, I think when you say you want to be a filmmaker or something, there's a rightful eyebrow raised and skepticism, because it's sort of like, oh, really? You're going to go make, oh, you're going to make movies? Really? Oh, yeah. How are you going to do that? You've never been west of the Mississippi. You're going to go to LA and make movies, and you're like, first off, I'll have to go west of the Mississippi. That's true. That's scary, but I'll do it. I'll drive through Arizona. But I just never lacked for like the belief that I could get it done. And I really do attribute that to where I'm from, that it's just in ways that I could talk for 2 hours about it, but I won't bore you anymore. But
no, I think we're all a captive audience here. So let's talk a little bit about, I also, again, we have people that have questions, but I personally, I want to know, and this is kind of jumping ahead. I love that. I'm like, tell me about when you were little and what inspired you, and then flash forward. What the heck goes through your mind when they call your name at the Academy Awards?
It's actually, it's one of those things that, the whole time leading up to it, you just don't want to take it for granted. You don't want to be like, I'm too busy, I'm working on something else. You want to like be like, wow, this could really, you're nominated, this could happen. And just be present, like, don't, just try to be in your body, and like pay attention, like what's happening here, and I had that all planned out, that I was gonna try to just, if I lose, no big deal. I'm just sitting there. It's cool. I'm at the Oscars. Whoever thought, Then they call your name, and I was pretty good. Like I like stayed there, and I got up and I walked down the aisle, and I was still like in my own body, sort of. And then I turned the corner, and I looked back, and there's like 1,500 people in black tie, and it's just like every famous person you've ever seen, and all the women in the dresses, and it's just a wall. And I saw Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones, and they were in traffic, and they were standing up to hug me, and I was like, oh, it's my good friends Catherine and Michael hugging me, and I just like ejected out of my body, and it was like 200 feet in the air, like looking down, just like on this, like I was like a parade float, like looking, going just like, wow, now, oh, there's someone telling me to come up on the stage. Look at that, there's a stage. And then I'm like up with the microphone, and I'm like, oh, it's a microphone. And, and I'm in the second, like I swear to you, like for the writers, or maybe this is just bias, but the second I got to the mic, I said like one sentence, and I look up, and there's this giant flashing red light directly in my eye line. It's a light box, and the light box says, "Time's up, time's up, time's up, time's up." And I'm like, thank you, and you feel this really hot, there's a follow spot on your back. You're backlit by this very bright spotlight that's found you, and you can actually feel the heat of it. It's warm. And the second you turn away from the thing, the spot just goes off you, and it goes off across the floor to find somebody else. So you get 15 seconds, okay, and you feel it, and then it's like, time's up, time's up. And then you watch the spotlight as your back like gets cold, like you're now cold because this hot light's leaving you. And it's like going off across the stage to find the next person. And you're like, and they're pulling you the other way. And it's just like, wow, that was weird. Like what just happened? But yeah, it's cool. It was fun.
I can remember, being, I'm this like 20 years ago, I can remember everybody being like, a Louisvillian, a Louisville guy. Like it was just for those of us, that were just starting in our careers, to be able to have one of us up there. I can remember it just like chills, just as though it was right now. So
Well, that's awesome. I mean, it was what you realize as time passes, as like you sort of see that, you know, incredible amount of good fortune goes into that moment. Like you have to, first of all, you have to find a subject that you can write about, and obviously write about it the best you can. Then it has to be made into a movie. Steven Soderbergh he did everything right. He made everything better, and he was just right about so many things that I fought him on, and then I just have to say, you were right, you're right, you're right. Amazing. And, and then that thing has to go out in the world and has to find an audience, and there's timing, so it has to be a subject that like you were kind of on. Like I've written things, I've worked really hard on things. I mean, for, nonstop for 3 years on something where I was actually ahead of the curve. I was just too far ahead of it. And then like when I was doing Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, and we came up with a story about the bankruptcy of General Motors and laying off of pension obligations and kind of this great thing. And it was a really cool story. And it took a long time to get it right. It took a long time to get it cast. I had Leonardo DiCaprio, I had this whole thing. And then like General Motors went bankrupt. Like it actually happened. Like the news actually came up and caught me. And it was really trouble. It was challenging. And so like with Traffic, it just went out in the world. People were ready to talk about it. So it made a splash. And then you just, it's just so much luck, And so I think I was kind of aware of that. And I was really, I'm still really appreciative of it. But the main thing I'm happy about is I just really liked the film, like the day that I like, so there's the Oscar, but like, to me, that's so subsidiary to the day that I saw the first assemblage, and Soderbergh invited me to watch like the 3 hour and 10-minute version. And I was sitting down in the front row, and I happened to, I got there early. I was super psyched. And then two guys come in and sit behind me, and I can hear them kind of whispering and laughing. I turn over and I look over, it's George Clooney and Brad Pitt. So they're sitting right behind me in this like friends and family screening in the afternoon in Warner Brothers. It's like maybe 15 or 20 people there. First showing. I'm like, oh, shit. So anyway, I watched the thing and I'm like, when it ended, so I knew in the first 20 seconds that he had done an incredible job. And I never wavered. I was on set a lot, like when we were shooting, but you just can't imagine like how it elevated. And then when it ended, like I jumped up, like I couldn't help it. I jumped up and I turned and I looked, and he was in the very back of the theater, standing in the doorway in this little theater at Warner Brothers. And I just start running up the aisle at him. And he's had some pretty, fraught relationships with screenwriters. Lim Dobbs famously, and we have really had our moments, without a doubt. And I saw as I was coming at him, like he's in the doorway and he starts to go like this. And I hugged him, and he's not a hugger. I hugged him and I just said really quietly, I said, "You're going to win the Academy Award for Best Director." And I was right. And in fact, at the Oscars, even because they do the writer award first, I kind of scurried past. I said a couple of out-of-body stupid things to the press that still I think are on like the Wikipedia page. And then I walked away and went back out because I really wanted to be in the crowd to watch him win. I was excited about it, and then it happened. So that was cool.
You probably, as you said, like so you were the screenwriter on it, and you probably had ideas of what you thought it would be. And then when you see it come to life, what an incredible experience that must have been. Now, tell me about how it feels when you write and hand it over to another director as to when you are writing to direct something yourself.
Well, I think you can tell like really quickly, they're different experience. Like it's not all one experience. So, like with Steven, like I'd had some experiences that were, all of them were kind of good. There were no bad experiences, but there were I had an experience where, a director really changed his mind about what he wanted to do. And so I'd written like 150 pages and it worked really well. And then I had to change it. And it was a little bit, I think it got worse, and so I'd worked on TV shows where I would do my writer's draft and like, David Milch would come in and like just make it better, and I was like, I love this experience. Like you won't hear a peep from me if and same thing with Steven, I felt like even when he like very close to shooting, he sent me down a huge blind alley, to go to write a different version of one of the storylines, and I was against it, But then he came over on literally on Thanksgiving, and he was like at my front door, and my girlfriend at the time was like, "You go away from here, Steven Soderbergh. We're not working today." But I did it. Like I changed it, and then later he said to me, and it was like 6 weeks of work, 7 days a week, and so it's not like a little thing; it's like a big thing. And then I did it, and then he said, "Oh yeah, you were right. You were right. The other way was better," And I was like, but that's, in that relationship, that was offset by all these other things where like my favorite storyline by far is the Benicio del Toro storyline. And that storyline was really made what it was by the constant prodding of Benicio and Benicio through Steven. So between them, they just, none of us knew what it was going to be, but they were never satisfied, and so that's like incredible because you have somebody who is just getting the, work from you that's better than you think you can do, in a way. And it's pushing you to be a kind of, to really just check all your stuff, and teaching you and all this stuff. And then there's this other experience, and I've had this other experience where it's just the machine, and the machine is like, and this is very rare, but it did happen, a couple of times where it's just like someone's going to do what they want, and they're in, ultimately they get to make the decision. And so you're just feeding stuff in that is never going to appear, and that's obviously not a good feeling, it's just, and you want to dial in on the wavelength of that person, because you want to help the director and you want to give them what they want to make, and yet for whatever reason, you're just not. And so you just sort of feel like you're lighting your own time on fire, where you're just like, I'm not the right person for this. And I want to do this for you, but I don't know how to do it the way you want it, and I got to that as I got older. I mean, when I was younger, I was just like, fuck you, I'm doing it my way. I know what I'm doing. You're an idiot. And, but over time, you just sort of realize, no, this really is a collaborative art form. And, I was super lucky with just Soderbergh. We laughed about the same shit. I would pitch stuff that was so insane, and he'd be like, that's great. Whereas in the past, in like 5 years in Hollywood, I would pitch stuff and people are just like, yeah, that's really clever, but we're never going to do that. That's so, you are clever. Yeah. Don't do that here. And so I think that, all those experiences though, watching someone do something as well as as Steven did it, being on set, being at the camera tests, being in all these things I was privy to, where I just saw him like, and it's like a whole different art form, so it's like, I always say with writing and directing, like there's this thing called a movie, and a movie is from here to here. And it's like the writer deserves an enormous amount of respect and credit because he has to face, in a lot of instances, the blank page. As a writer, you're in the something from nothing business, something from nothing. And it's freaking hard sometimes, like I've got pages spread across my desk here, and then, I had a good day today, so I'm in a great mood. But like yesterday, if you'd seen me, I was like comatose, curled up in the fetal position. My wife's like, how'd it go? Oh, not that well, just not that well. And everything I'm doing stupid. And so, but so you go through that, and that's painful, and it takes a lot of kind of faith to keep doing it sometimes, but it's a great job. I love doing it. But that's like that first half, and you're making thousands of decisions that, are they right? Are they wrong? I don't know. You think it holds together. Then a director comes in Now it takes the baton, let's say halfway or 40% through, gets the baton. And now it's for that job is, 10,000 opinions, any 5% of which will change the film entirely. So suddenly you're like the captain of a ship, and you're just like, you turn this thing a tiny bit and it just goes like this. And the thing that screenwriters don't understand often, when they get angry at directors or whatever, they feel like their work was changed, is they don't really know what it's like to be the final arbiter of those 10,000 decisions. And they're so picayune, it's like, what color is the tie? What type of knot do you want in the tie? How long do you want the tie? How high above the belt do you want it? Do you want him to wear a belt? What kind of shoes is he wearing? Do you think he should have glasses? What kind of haircut? What color is his hair? Do you want wallpaper or paint? What kind of table? Do you want a round table or a rectangle table? Do you want windows? Do you want light coming in through the windows or not? What do you think about silhouette? What kind of lens do you want here? Do you want this to be a wide shot? You think this might play in the master? How are we going to do it? Do you want the camera to move? I'm just off the top of my head, I could do this literally for 6 hours. And, and so you're a machine for making these decisions, and you have department heads often, like Bradford or whoever they are, Robert Ellsworth, geniuses. And like they're going to bring you all their genius. You have to make all this room for them to have that garden to play in. But then you also have to make sure their work's going to fit in, with the other department heads who are also playing in their garden. And sometimes they're not playing in the same garden, and so those decisions you're making quite confidently with the production designer who maybe has their Oscar over here, and then you've got the DP and he's got his Oscar over here, and they hate each other, who knew? And so writers, I think, rarely have sympathy or have enough sympathy for that kind of directorial process. And I feel like directors can easily forget the pain of the blank page, of the nothingness, of the bringing something from nothing. And I think that, it's probably why I like to do both. I think they just go really, really well together. You can live and die by your own sword, and, you can always blame the screenwriter.
And when you're directing your own work, it becomes very hard to point a finger. You're like, this guy right here.
Well, what I always do when I'm on set and like and it's not working is I always say this thing. I'm like, and cut to the screenwriter. And then I do this, because it's, inevitably it's something you didn't see. Anyway.
And then find the producer and make that, get it.
Yes, I left out the producer. We have not talked about the great producer, because I do that job as well too. And that's another job that, like, when we were doing Traffic, I couldn't even tell you what a producer did. I was like, I don't know what they do exactly. Like, I never talked to them, and like, I mean, they're around, I guess. I mean, but it's like, if you really love budgets and you are really greedy, highly recommend. No, there's creative producers who are incredible, but
I'm like, oh God, ostracize all the. I'm like, my master's is in producing.
No,
not too greedy, but I do love the budgets.
No, I'm totally kidding. It's like, it's just like anything. You can't. It's like, that's why it's I think it's a great art form. It's just, you can't. There's room for like so many variations. Like when I worked on Gold, like Teddy Schwarzman, who was the producer of Gold, he's 100% cut from like the David O. Selznick mold or Louis B. Mayer. Like Teddy Schwarzman, there is, and I mean this in the best way possible. Like, he is really a filmmaker, and he's creative. He can, he can write. He understands. He just has an instinct for camera and everything. So it's like, and he is willing to put up his own money, and he and he's a great businessman, and he's a lawyer, and it's like, so he's like an incredibly interesting guy, and he's like good company, and he's just formidable, and it's like, so there's that kind of producer. Then there's other producers who will put in money and just get an executive producer credit, and you never see them. There's other producers who, they come to lunch, they come one day for lunch and they want to eat with the movie star, and then you don't see them again. And then there's, and then there's the creative producer who's really there with you. And as the director, they're really that person who can say no to you, and I find that very painful. Like, just for me personally, like, I just don't like it. Like, if someone can say no to me, I have to check myself all the time. Like, oh, gosh, you're a villain. You're a villain, but they're not, you're partners. And there's this process of, it's very intimate and it's very intense. So,
well, speaking about the medium of film and TV, I'm going to switch over and bring on Stephanie Lindsay, who has a question for you a little bit about that. I'm going to bring you over, Stephanie, and then unmute you. Here we go. Oh, tell me if can you hear us? Let's see. There she is.
Hi.
I see you.
Nice to see you. I have a fish, but I'm not anywhere near the ocean.
Oh my gosh, you do have a fish.
So I was just curious about what originally motivated you to choose film and TV as your writing medium, and whether from the outset you knew that eventually you also wanted to direct.
Okay, good questions. So I did not initially choose film and television. Like, it never occurred to me. Like, all growing up, all I wanted to do was write fiction. I mean, when I thought about writing, I just wanted to write fiction. And I published a short story in the Iowa Review, a good literary magazine, when I was young. I wrote poems. I did a little bit of journalism, but not very well. Just kicking around, like having odd jobs, during all this formative period. And I mean, like, kind of my early 20s. And I ended up in New York working at the Paris Review, just the center of literary world to me. And George Plimpton was there, and like just all sorts of interesting people. And I was still trying to write fiction. I had a good friend from Louisville who lived there, who got a story published in the New Yorker, which was amazing. And I'd actually helped him a little bit with it. So I was like, saw a couple sentences in the New Yorker, which was just like, like, oh my God, this is really happening. I'm 25. Wow. But I was having a lot of trouble doing it too. I put a lot of pressure on myself, and it was almost crippling, and it was crippling actually. And I had a friend who was trying to be a stand-up comedian. And he would totally acknowledge he's the least funny stand-up comedian ever. But I would go watch his shows, and they were hard to sit through. And one day he said, hey, would you read my spec scripts? And I honestly never heard of a spec script. I didn't even know what it was. Never heard of it. And he gave me, and I said, I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything at all about it. I'm the wrong. He goes, no, but you were like, right. And you could just read them. And so I read them, and like, I remember one was like a Seinfeld spec and something else, and I think at the time, and I told him what I thought. I kind of filed that away, and so I'm living in New York, and every night at 7:30, so I'd found a TV on the street. Someone had put an old TV out, and I'd taken it up to my 5th floor walk up, and I put it in, and I had these rabbit ear kind of set up, and I couldn't get a lot of content, but 7:30 every night, The Simpsons would be on every night. And that was the time I happened to be home. So I was watching The Simpsons every single night. And I remember where I was when the very first episode of The Simpsons came on. So for me, it was like, where were you when JFK was shot? So I had a powerful reaction to The Simpsons, like really powerful. But that was, several years earlier. I had read these spec scripts from this friend of mine. And just one day I was like, I can write a Simpsons. I know I can. I'm going to do it. And so I sat down and I wrote a 80-page. So Simpsons should be 30 pages, but I didn't know that. I wrote an 80-page one called Family Wheel of Jeopardy. And, it was really fun. It came really fast. I did it in like 2 days. I had to make the dialogue, I had to set tabs. So, and to make, name, dialogue. So I would make one edit on page 3 and it would change the formatting all the way to page 80. So you had to be so careful with what you wrote. And I realized, like, I because I was struggling with fiction, and I just felt joy writing this thing. And then around that time, the movie The Player came out, and I felt like it just felt to me like in the same voice in a way, like it was slightly satirical, but it just felt real and true, and I really related to it. And I sort of had this feeling. I was like, maybe the way I write is I actually see things visually and then I transcribe them. And that's really worth thinking about, because that felt important somehow. And then the joy I felt doing The Simpsons felt important. And then in the middle of all that, a guy I'd known when I was in Boston, who'd been a lawyer, had a real job, he moved to Los Angeles, and he decided he was going to quit being a lawyer and he was going to work in a mailroom. And I was like, Andrew, that's insane. Like, you have a real job being a lawyer at a firm. You work for the Kennedys. Like, you're like a made man. Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, and I'm making $15,000 a year. So he's like traded his salary to go, and I was making $300 a week. So I was like, I related to that, and I know how impossible that was. So I was like, anyway, a little while later, I don't know how exactly it happened, but I sent him that Simpsons and a couple SNL sketches. I'd also written some SNL sketches. And I sort of thought, if I could write on Saturday Night Live, that'd be great. And unbeknownst to me, he knew a guy who'd been in the mailroom with him, who was at this agency called Intertalent, who was an agent on, this is boring, you can just stop me anytime. But he was an agent on the account of Sam Simon. And Sam Simon was one of the creators. He was the guy whose name you wouldn't pay attention to, because there was like James L. Brooks and Matt Groening and then Groening and then Sam Simon. But the three of them created The Simpsons. And he was still the showrunner. And so somehow that 80-page spec made its way up to this guy. And I got a phone call saying, Sam will hire you on The Simpsons. And I was like, what? Like, it just seemed like, out of nowhere. And so I sent this stuff, that same stuff, to my friend at Intertalent. And also I sent it to a guy over the transom named Bernie Brillstein. And Bernie Brillstein was the manager of all the SNL people, all the SNL writers, all the SNL. And this sounds just crazy, because I'm telling you, this is like, the odds of this are like so slim. It's really weird. Bernie Brillstein called me on my answering machine at home. And he was a manager and he's a smart guy, and he got cut off, and it was like, if you're ever out in LA, give me a call. And so I ended up making this move. I go out to LA and I drive across the country. I leave New York, I leave my job. I get a car, I drive to LA. There was like really heavy rainstorms in January of '93, like 3 solid weeks of rain. And for some reason, I stopped in high desert for like a week, and I was staying in a trailer in high desert. And while I was there, Sam Simon got fired from The Simpsons. He got, and it was, I don't know, it just got, somehow he lost his job. And anyway, and so that job fell through. And so I was out in LA, and I didn't want to give up. So did that answer both questions?
Well, it sounds, I think yes. How the process of how you actually got into film and television as your writing medium. It sounds like a lot of doors just started opening once you.
No. Okay, so let me finish. Let me finish for sure. So okay, yeah. So those two things were like really good fortune. Like, and I'd been trying to be a serious like literary writer, every day now for like 3 years. And so I had published one short story for which I was paid $100. And, you know, my mother referred to me as a writer in air quotes. Like when I was moving to LA, she was in the kitchen on the phone. She goes, well, my son, the writer, you know, and I saw this and it was just like a knife through my heart. And I'd had George Plimpton telling me, don't go out to LA. It's a huge error. He's like, I've seen it happen 1,000 times. The same thing happens every time. People disappear for a year and then they appear again with their tail between their legs. Skip that year. I'll find you a job as a real editor here in New York. Okay. And he set me up with a bunch of interviews. And I actually got a couple job offers, like to be paid like a real wage and not having to answer the phone for somebody, but somebody would answer my phone, you know, and it was so tempting. But I knew I really wanted to write. I didn't want to be an editor and I didn't see how I could do both. Just so I got to LA and I had way too much pride to just go back and say, George, you were right. I'm an idiot. This was all chimera. You know, none of it was real. All these things I thought were happening, that nothing happened. Nothing was real. But I remembered that Bernie had said, call me. I had that answering machine message. I could never get him back on the phone. Like he left me half a message. It got cut off. So I call him up. I'm in LA and I tell his assistant, I'm like, he told me this. Assistant calls me back and says, yeah, can you come in tomorrow morning at 7 a.m.? Bernie gets to the office early. I'm like, sure. So I drive over to, it's actually, his offices are where the Soho House, West Hollywood is. They're on this like kind of, it wasn't this famous building, but now it's this kind of weird famous building. Brillstein Gray Entertainment, Brad Gray, Bernie Brillstein, you know, real operation. And I go in, I have this meeting with him and I'm thinking he's going to say, I'll manage you as a screenwriter and you can get on Saturday Night Live. You're a mate, you know, this is going to happen. He doesn't even seem aware that I want to be a writer. Like, he's just like, he talks to me for a while and then he like looks on his desk and he has a couple scripts sitting there and he tears the covers off and he tosses them to me and he's like, do coverage on these and come back and see me. And I take them and I'm out of the office on the street holding these two scripts. Before I can even realize, I don't know what he means by coverage. I have no idea. Coverage, what is that? So I'm calling around to the few people I've met in LA trying to ask. I get a hold of a guy who I sort of know who's in the Readers Union. And so he reads for a studio and writes coverage. And he explains to me what it is. So one of these is clearly a Chris Farley movie and one is like a David Spade movie. And I write 10,000 words on each, an essay, 10,000 words, what you should do to make these into a movie. That's what I perceive coverage to be. It's insane. It's like a nervous breakdown. Like no one in history would read 10,000 words from me about anything. And I send it to Bernie or I drop it off. And like a little while later, the assistant calls me again and says, Bernie wants you to come in. Can you come in at 7 a.m.? And so I come in again and he's like, I sit with him in the morning and he's like, I have an opportunity for you. And I'm like, awesome. What is it? And he said, I am starting a film division and I'd like you to be the second hire I have for the film division. And you can work for the woman who's I hired. And, you know, very soon, I think you'll be able to do your own thing. And I was like, wow, what does that mean exactly? And he's like, well, you know, you like answer her phone and just kind of be around. I'll let you sit in the company meetings. And, you know, I'm like, what's it pay? He's like, well, what do you need? I'm like, I literally think of the biggest number I can think of, $800 a week. And he goes, great. And I'm like, health insurance? He goes, of course there's health insurance. I'm like, can I make free phone calls back to New York? He goes, you make all the phone calls you want. And I'd seen people eating in the kitchen. I'm like, can I eat the bagels in the kitchen? He goes, there's food. There's enough. Yes, you can eat. And I was like, all right, I'll do it. And he goes, and I'll pay you $150 for every novel you can cover that you think should be a movie. I'm like, awesome. And I can just pick whatever they are. He goes, yeah, pick whatever they are. It's whatever you like. And so like literally the next day I go to work at Brillstein Gray and I'm like there and I go in because Bernie's there at 7. I go at 7. I'm making calls to all my friends at New York where it's 10 o'clock and I'm in the morning and I'm like, hey, I'm eating bagels. I'm drinking coffee. I'm at Brillstein Gray. I work in the film business. What do you do? I have no idea. I'm plowing through all of Walker Percy's novels because I think they should all be movies. And I'm writing coverage on that. And, you know, and then, and so after 3 weeks, because I was making $800 a week and I was living in I had an empty apartment that someone had moved out of in Koreatown. So I didn't have to pay rent for the first month I was in LA, or 3 weeks. And I live very inexpensively, don't spend any money. And I'm covering about 4 novels a week, which is like an extra $600. So at the end of that 3 weeks, I had amassed what seemed to me like literally a fortune. So I go in to see Bernie, 7 a.m., same place. And I'm like, Bernie, I have to quit. He's like, why? That's crazy. Because I got to sit in these company meetings where they would talk about films and TV shows. And I didn't realize that I wasn't supposed to talk. So I just am like raising my hand like I'm in high school, and I'm just like holding forth, and people seemed to be listening. Like, it was crazy. Like, I went from being like a borderline homeless person to like suddenly I'm in this room with real people, like Brad Pitt's manager and like all these high level, and they're actually listening to me when I talk. And it was like a dream. It was like a dream. And Bernie really liked me, and he was like, he just said, he goes, kid, I mean, did you tell your mother that you're thinking about this? I'm like, I did. I told her I was thinking of quitting. He goes, what'd she say? I'm like, she cried. She couldn't even talk. And he goes, your mother's right. You should not quit this job. This is a big opportunity for you. And I'm telling you, you're in the right place, doing the right thing. And I was like, I know, it feels so organically right. Like, I just feel so happy. I love being here. Like, I love coming in. Like, I'm working there like 17 hours a day because I don't want to leave. It's like way nicer being there than anywhere I've ever been. Like, I'm so happy. I can look out and see, it's the hills. Anyway, but I just said, I'm not getting any writing done. I want to be a writer, and I can't write when I'm here because I like it too much. And if I stay here, I'll never write because this is too much fun. And there was this long silence. And he goes, all right, kid, I understand. I miss you. I'm going to miss you. And I left. And it was like nothing happened. I did nothing. I had no forward movement in LA for 18 months after that, maybe, or a year to 18 months. Like, it was just, it was just a lot of rejections. Like, I would get a door kind of wedged open and it would be slammed again. And to the point, like, I somehow had gotten the home number of a guy who was, I'll just give you a quick example, a guy who was doing a spin-off of Baywatch called Baywatch Nights. And Baywatch Nights, Mitch Hasselhoff is going to play the saxophone and be a detective and solve mysteries. And I had heard about this, and I get this guy's home phone number, and I call him up, and I'm like, he answers the phone, hello. And I'm like, listen, hey, I'm Stephen Gaghan. I know you're doing this spinoff, and like, I just want you to know I have a lot of ideas for this show. I love Baywatch, and I can do a great job with Mitch as a detective, and I saxophone. I love jazz. Like, it's going to be perfect. Whatever I'm pitching. And then I stop, and there's this long silence, and the guy says, "How did you get this number?" And I was like, click, and that was like twice a week, and I felt like I had made a huge error. I felt like all the people who understood me were somewhere else, that I had chosen, like, I chose everything that, like, every decision I made in my life was stupid. I'd done it all wrong. I was like just adrift. I'd washed up in LA, not my place. And just, how long can I stay here before I can leave? How long do I have to stay before I leave? And then the other thing, because I don't want to go on forever, but
well, I want to say, if you don't mind me jumping in here, that this kind of actually segues into another question about how you kind of transitioned into that. And so I want to get to that because we have 10 minutes left. So let's.
What?
Yeah, we've been doing this for 50 minutes. I know it's fun.
Shit. Well, I can go over.
No, look, we're like, it's the Stephen Gaghan channel. We're doing this for the night.
Okay. Well,
I'm gonna turn it into a cooking class though, because I have to make dinner eventually. So I'll be here making something in the background.
Okay, I understand.
No, do you want to finish your thought, or
So I was just gonna say that, like, so I was working really hard, writing lots of screenplays and television specs, trying to get a break, and I became friends during that time with Charlie Kaufman, who's a screenwriter who, and I was actually with him when he was printing very early draft, if not the first draft, of Being John Malkovich. And he was a disgruntled, frustrated television writer. He had an overall deal. He's at Disney. He's up in like a building on like a floor. It's just like out of the movie. There's nobody on the floor. There's Air Bud posters and you just get off the elevator and it's like packing boxes and empty offices and you could hear click, 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 click. And it's Charlie way in the corner of this office building in Burbank. And I read Being John Malkovich and I was just like, it blew my mind. It blew my mind. And I had gotten to know, around that time, I gotten to know Owen Wilson and Wes Anderson, and I read an early copy of Rushmore, and that blew my mind. And then, but Charlie and I got really close, and he said he would do me a favor and read one of my scripts. So he read my Frasier spec and took me out to dinner. And he was like, did you bring the script? I was like, no. Did you bring a notebook? No. Did you bring a piece of paper? No. Do you have a pencil? No. He's like, why not? I'm like, because this is where you tell me I'm a genius. And then nothing happens. He goes, no. And he turns the page and we're at a Mexican restaurant on Beverly Boulevard, and he just spends 2 hours eviscerating it. Like, he looks at me with such withering contempt and he goes, why did you write this? I didn't have an answer. And he tore it apart. And at the end of that dinner, I'm staggering down Beverly Boulevard like I've been hit in the head with a baseball bat. And I realize that all the people who've been telling me my work was so good, none of them had read it. They were all lying. Like, they had not read it, or they didn't know. But Charlie knew, and I knew he knew, and he tore it apart. And I had a choice of either that was the moment, turn tail and go back, or throw out every single thing I'd written, all of it, start again, and start with, real humility and try to learn the craft of screenwriting. And, obviously I decided to stick it out, but.
Well, is that inspiration enough? Was that great or what, Stephanie?
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I tend to go on and take short questions and make long answers. I'm sorry.
No apologies. That was spectacular. And I love that it spoke to kind of the tenacity. And also, I think that sometimes as artists and filmmakers, we have to be our own gasoline. We have to have that kind of self-esteem that sometimes is not exactly on par with what we're cranking out, to kind of keep us going and motivated in this industry. So along the lines of what you were just talking about, I'm going to bring on Richard Van Cleek. He wants to ask you a little bit about some of your formative moments. Let's see, I'm going to unmute you. I'm going to see if I can ask to start video, unless you're just being very still over there, Richard. I'm teasing. Okay, there. Oh
my God, what is that? I think that's left over from a Zoom session with my granddaughter. I apologize for that. Very exciting. Well, you kind of thanks for spending time, Stephen. You kind of have gotten into this, but I was wondering if there were any few formative or eureka moments from either low budget or no budget films to large budget films that you could mention.
Yeah, there's so many, like, like what I was talking about in that last, question, that was like the biggest eureka moment, because it was like, I hadn't been thinking of film and television as a place that I could put my real artistic soul. I looked at it as a formulaic system that was like a second-class art form. But to my mind, what that meant was just, genre is like kind of beneath contempt, or like you're not beneath contempt. Like, I like genre things, but you're operating by genre rules, and that's so limiting that it becomes something you don't need to take too seriously. And then what that leads to is just really bad scripts and bad work, because it's just not true. The biggest moment for me was that was kind of this huge appreciation of people like Hitchcock, you know, and it was looking at that same time, I got a hold of that. I got a hold of two things that were like texts. And one was the Godfather Notebook, which has since been published. But at the time in like 93, it was photocopied and passed around. And I had like an old watermark copy that someone had given me. And it was Coppola breaking down a scene from The Godfather, breaking down the wedding scene. And it's him troubleshooting every moment and talking about what he wants it to be. And it's so profound. It's so, you know, no writer in history had more of a grasp and the depth of like a moment. And I saw it and I was like, oh my God, that's not, of course, The Godfather, there's no accidents. I mean, look at that. That's like, wow, how do you do that? And then I got that Hitchcock, Truffaut on Hitchcock book, which is just this incredible long discussion between Francois Truffaut and Alfred Hitchcock. And in that I saw, you know, it's like film school. Like if you read that book carefully, it is a complete film you know, it's all there. And so these kind of things were happening. And then like another thing happened, which is there was a midnight screening at an art theater in LA on La Brea, since closed, unfortunately, but of Train Spotting. And like, I went with 3 or 4 friends I'd made in LA, and they're great guys. Like they've, you know, gone to good high schools, worked hard, gone to good colleges. They had good jobs. That wasn't my track at that moment. And so I just remember like we're watching Train Spotting from like 12 to 2 in the morning, and they're just laughing and like thinking that it's so weird. And I'm like, oh my God, someone's made my biopic and I didn't get to. Like, I could write, like, they were like writing about this kind of sketchy, dodgy life, and it's so fun. And I was like, oh, my sketchy, dodgy life is fun. I should write about that, you know? And that's sort of how I found my way to writing the script that I called Havoc. And it was ostensibly a rewrite, but it was me just writing about my high school years in Kentucky, but I transposed it to Los Angeles, to Pacific Palisades. So and everyone was like, when they read it, everybody out here was like, how do you know this world so well? And how do you know the Palisades? I was literally like, I would drive to the Palisades and look up just like write down street names. I'd never been in the Pacific Palisades. I didn't know anything about it. I would be like, oh, there's a coffee shop here called this, and there's this. And then I was like, but I did know downtown, and I knew how to, I knew how to buy drugs downtown, and I knew how to get into trouble. And so I brought real authenticity to that. And so that whole journey, like the only journey that matters, like in everything I've said, the only thing that matters is going from basically being inauthentic with this art form to taking it really seriously and really failing. And then through some inputs, getting really lucky to have this emotional response and be moved to try to emulate it, and yet in my own voice. And that was the whole journey. Like that was the path, And I think that on top of it, because I idolized Hemingway and Tolstoy and Faulkner and Fitzgerald, like to such a level, they were just on such pedestals. Like you'd be at the Paris Review and the phone would ring and it'd be like Nadine Gordimer, who wins a Nobel Prize, and she'd be like screaming that they've misquoted her, someone's misquoted her in her interview, and you're like talking to Nadine Gordimer, and it's like the gap between sitting as an intern at the Paris Review and like Nadine Gordimer, it just was incomprehensible, crippling. I just couldn't get but somehow film, dialogue, the scenes, like just getting to make it a play, and then also just writing about the stuff that was me and happening to me, that was the sea shift, that, yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And then this perfectly segues into the next. Thank you for joining us, Richard, and that fantastic courage you have behind you.
Yeah. Don't let that thing eat you.
I know. It looks like it's about to attack.
Exactly. Keeping it interesting over here. So I think that Shepard wants to join us. He wants to come on for a second and ask a little bit about your process, which you were just indicating a bit of. Let's see if I can get you to come on over here, Shepard. 1 second. Thanks for your patience as we pop
No worries.
people in.
I realize I have this afternoon coffee. It's very strong, and I should say, don't let me spend more, more questions, less anecdotes.
No, gosh, I love it. I mean, personally, I'm over here taking notes to the side because I'm so inspired. So thank you so much. I love the anecdotes and the experience that you've had, and I just thank you all so much. Okay, hold on, wait, Shepard is coming back. Don't worry.
No worries.
Didn't mean to kick you out, Shep. Okay, coming back to you. But yeah, I'm trying to moderate, but at the same time, I'm over here in awe. So let's see, I got you. Let's see if I can unmute you. And we'll just.
Am I crooked?
Yes, you look, there you go.
Yep.
All right, Shepard, you're on with Steven.
Hey, Steven.
Hi there.
I don't have any.
He doesn't have a bird, but it appears he also doesn't have much of a signal. Let's see, are you with us, Shep? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. All right, you're good to go.
You're good.
Cool. Thank you, Susie, for going over for this, and thank you, Steven, for going so deeply into your history. And I love their answer about just finding your authentic voice. My questions along the same lines is it's about your research and your process for really finding stories that you tell, especially since you're writing things that I'm sure are alien to you. Like, really, what does that research process look like for films like Traffic or any of the other stories that you've really gone out of your own skin to write?
That's an awesome question. And I love it because I think that's probably the thing that I know about that's actually the most valuable, particularly for people that want to write, because so when I don't know what made me think that I could actually go out and do research and turn it into film. I don't remember what possibly, but when I was, so the whole thing of how Traffic came about was a very strange situation where I'll try to make a long story short, but it's all relevant. So I had written a screenplay. I got to write a screenplay with Michael Tolkien, who had written The Player. So we actually got to collaborate. This film that had gotten me at the beginning, I ended up working with him, and he taught me so much. And we ended up with this script that was wonderful, but everyone assumed that he wrote all of. But he called a couple people because he's an amazing guy. He called and he got me a lawyer, and he was having a meeting with a studio exec, and he said, no, Steve wrote a lot of that movie, because the screenplay got put on, Premiere Magazine said it was the best unmade screenplay in America, and so, or something like that. And so it got this notoriety, and everyone just assumed it's Tolkien because it was like Tolkien's voice. But in that process, I had learned from him how to write screenplays, and I also learned how to write in his voice. And so he talked to a guy named Alex Gartner at Fox 2000, and he was having a meeting, and he said, you should have a meeting with Steve. He's interesting, or whatever he said. I don't know what he said, but this guy, Alex Gartner, called me up and he said, I want to have a general meeting. And I didn't know what that was. I go in and have a general meeting with this guy, and he says this question to me. He goes, so have you been thinking about anything? I'm like, yeah, I've been thinking about stuff. How about you? You thinking about stuff? He goes, no, I mean, like for movies, what do you want to do? And I'm like, oh, and I just read Dog Soldiers. So I was like, I want to do a satire on the military, or maybe it was Buffalo Soldiers. I can't remember. Maybe I'd read both of them. And I'm like, I want to do a satire on the military. And he goes, oh, we have someone with a deal here who has an idea that's similar to that. A director, would you want to meet with him? And I'm like, who is it? He goes, it's Ed Zwick. And I go, yeah, I'd love to meet with Ed. That's great. So I go to Ed's office, and he's like, Alex says you have an idea. I'm like, okay, I do. And I tell him this kind of half-cocked thing about I want to do a satire on the military. And he goes, huh. He goes, I have an idea. He goes, my idea is I want to do a satire on the war on drugs. And I go, oh, your idea is better. I want to do your idea. And he goes, why should I let you do my idea? And I said, because I have 19 years of research into the consumer side of the drug business, and I have to put it somewhere. And like, okay, that was either the best thing to say or the worst thing to say. And it turned out to be a good thing, because he goes, wait a second, are you a drug addict? And I'm like, yes, I am. And he goes, are you still using drugs? I go, I've been sober for 6 weeks. And he goes, that's not very long. And I'm like, it feels like a really long time. And he goes, all right. So we had to go into Fox 2000 and do this pitch. And he had a couple ideas and I had a couple ideas. And he's just nodding because they like him. And he's like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. We go to make the deal. And this is the thing. So for some reason in my brain, I'm like, I need a research budget. And like, no one had really asked for that in a movie. And they're like, what do you mean you need a research budget? I'm like, I need money to go and research, because I know about one side of this, but I don't know about the policy side. Interdiction, the drug czar, the DEA, the senators. Like, I got to go to Washington. I got to go to the border. I got to go do. And they're like, all right, how much do you think you need? And I was like, I need $25,000. Just without blinking, which was a lot of money. And they said, okay. And so I had this research budget that I could only spend on research. So I spent a year. I went out, I read every book you could think of. I went to DC. I couldn't get to the drug czar. He wouldn't talk to me, but I talked to 10 people in his office, and they were all full of shit. They were full of shit. And I just wrote down what they said, and I ended up at the Pentagon. And I was talking to a guy who was the Deputy Secretary of Defense for Counter-Narcotics and Counterterrorism. Counter-narcotics and counterterrorism were the same job in the Pentagon, run by one guy. And I'm sitting there and I'm just listening to him. And I finally, because I've learned a lot now, I say this thing to him. I go, listen, I hear what you're saying, but like, everybody knows that 80% of the drugs, they don't come on boats up through the Caribbean. It comes in semis and tractor trailers over highway on the border with Mexico. And that's how it goes through, right? And so, like, why don't you do something about it if you care so much? And he goes, and he exploded at me. He goes, I have 2 graduate degrees. I have a PhD and a master's. I have a house in the Virginia suburbs. I have a wife and 2 kids. I've spent 5 years of my life working on this. And so what? I can get it from 80% to 78%, or I do nothing and it goes to 82%. And there's nowhere I can go from here. Nobody wants to hire anybody out of counter narcotics. I'm stuck. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, this guy's a casualty, of this misguided policy. And it was so visceral. I was just like, wow, and I wrote it all down. So not knowing what I was doing, I think is extremely valuable. Like, literally, and being from Kentucky, by the way, is unbelievably valuable for this, because Kentucky, we were a border state in the Civil War, we're like pretty equally balanced between red and blue. Like I was middle class, from the middle of the block. I didn't have a ton of opinions about stuff. Like, I didn't think I knew a lot. I knew what I didn't know, which was everything. So I would just like ask questions. I would go and, I didn't have an axe to grind, and people would talk to me, because you're not a journalist. It's not going to go in the newspaper. They're not on the record. People will talk to screenwriters. Everybody wants to talk, that's what I learned. And so it became like this secret weapon, so I'm working on something right now. Oh, here. So I'm working on something right now, and I'm working on a book, and it's this biography of Richard Holbrooke, who's a diplomat. And so I went around, same thing. I need a research budget. Unfortunately, the research budget didn't grow. It's the same research budget I had on Traffic 20 years later. But like, if you look, so here's the people I've interviewed. If they have a check mark, I talk to them. And if they're missing a check mark, I haven't talked to them yet. And so I interviewed Strobe Talbot, Tom Donnellan, Kurt Campbell. I interviewed Susan Rice, National Security Advisor. I interviewed Samantha Power, former Ambassador to the United Nations. And those interviews fill this entire book. And so anytime like I'm working on this thing, and like if I don't have inspiration, which is pretty much 24/7, I just go in this notebook and I look on some random page, and yeah, like I can't even say this like is insider information. I just read this thing, it's so interesting, but if I said it, I could get in trouble because it's like somebody told me this kind of, and I'd have to transmogrify it. But this is like this real shit about people, how people were leaking on each other at the highest levels of the state, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, and they're leaking their points of view to try to influence one another, and it's so relevant to the thing I'm trying to work on. And so just kind of bumbling around, I realized, and like during that sort of in that same time period, right after traffic happened, I got to know, like you can kind of suddenly start to meet some of your idols. And so I met Frank Pearson, who had written Dog Day Afternoon and Cool Hand Luke and like a million other things. And we kind of hit it off. We would talk a lot. And one day he said to me, he goes, because the Writers Guild put up billboards all over LA, and they were, his quotes. So they're Pearson quotes like Attica, Attica, or nobody can eat 52 eggs, from Cool Hand Luke. And I'm talking to Frank, and he said to me, he goes, so be honest with me, like your movie, like it's a good movie, but like all the best lines in there, like somebody else said them, right? Like somebody said that to you and you just like wrote it down. And then he goes, because all my lines, like those lines that are on billboards all over LA, those are all things I just wrote down that I heard somebody else say. And I was like, well, not all of it. I mean, come on, I did a little something. But it's out there. There's so many real good stories out in the world that need to be told. And you can get such an advantage by just going and getting the truth of someone else's experience, because you'll never make it up. It'll never be as precise. And like when I'm writing, I find that at first I'm kind of just blathering and it's not good. And then somehow one of those sentences works its way in. And then everything that preceded it gets thrown out. And it's like this, they just galvanize you, you realize, fuck, that feels true. It's so powerful. And you just keep hunting for those, and that's the process.
Well, damn, that's good. Richard Holbrooke, I just read War on Peace, which is, a work of journalism, but super, like that process of writing, like what you're doing, it sounds like you have even more doors open writing fiction and researching biographies than you would if you were going at it strictly from a journalistic perspective. So I appreciate that perspective.
I really think it's true, because you put on your junior journalist cap, but it's like a safe space because you're going to just transmogrify it into something else. It's going to become this other thing. And so for a lot of people, it's really a safe place to talk. And yeah, War and Peace is interesting. And I've read a lot of books about this world now. And it's, in fact, one of the lines that I just was messing around with in the script is a line that I'm not sure either Tony Lake wrote it or Richard Holbrooke, and it ended up in Bill Clinton's first foreign policy speech that he ever gave when he was running against George Bush, George H.W. Bush. And he said, now that we've won the Cold War, we must not lose the peace, something like that. And I love that line. It's a powerful line, and that's going to be in my thing for sure. So
I can't wait
well,
to
good luck
see
if you're writing
the billboards that come out.
Oh yeah,
The Stephen Gaghan billboard.
I'm ready. Bring them on.
We'll start pulling quotes. Thanks for joining us, Shep. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Susie.
So, Stephen, that was a really, really cool time of insight into your process and into your background. And I thank you so much for your, like we were talking about, authenticity. I think that when you go into projects, whether you or artists in general, with authenticity in mind, beautiful art can be made. And I thank you so much for what you've contributed to our society and what you are working on still right there in that beautiful office of yours. And I really hope that you will come back and join us in person, the sneak preview maybe of the film that you're writing now or your next project, or join us in some capacity, because I think that you are incredibly inspiring, hugely entertaining. Like, time escaped me too. I looked down, I was like, oh my gosh, I was just totally lost. Thank you.
I fall in a well. Like I need to have a timer in front of me that's like, you have to, because
We're jumping in the well with you. So at least we're all in there together. I love it.
It's funny, like when I have meetings, where I have to explain, and now they're on Zoom, I'm like, oh, this is what we're doing. And I want to, I'm pitching it to the people that will have to put up the money and everything. And the producers are pretty smart, and they're like, do you have a plan? And I actually do. I have a plan, because I know they have a hard out in an hour, and I'm like, and so I send them this, this is exactly how I want it to run. And the producer, he's a great producer, and he was like, wow, that's amazing. Like I figured you'd have, something, but I've never seen that so perfect. Because I have an event planning business. I need to and I was like, yeah, but listen, here's the thing. All those little time period, I'll blow over everyone. Like you have to stop me and cut me off.
Hey, the intent is there, the intent. And maybe this goes back to where the producer comes in, right? Like and the AD, they're like, okay, we keep you on time, you creative genius.
I don't know about that, but it's definitely like, I will use the time. And and in that particular meeting, it was super funny because I wanted to say everything I had to say in half the time, and then have half the time for them to ask questions. And I looked down, and there was 10 minutes left in the hour. I was just like, oh my God. All right, let's have questions.
Well, hey, best laid intentions.
But it worked. And we went 15 minutes over, and it all worked out fine. But it was.
And it all worked out tonight. We went a little bit over, but I think that everybody who joined us and everybody who will watch this will be very inspired and very appreciative of your time, your sharing of your stories. And we look forward to connecting with you again.
Okay, great.
Whenever
My
that
pleasure.
may be. So thank you so much. And
bye, everybody.
Thank you all so much. Take care. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you to everybody for tuning in and joining us. We have our next Filmmaker Forum coming up on June 17th with Mary Clay Boland, who is a two-time Emmy-winning casting executive. So it'll be fantastic to switch roles then. We've spoken with screenwriters, editor, cinematographer, and now we're going to learn a little bit more about the casting process on June 17th. So please sign up for that, submit your questions ahead of time. And also, if you are so inclined, we ask for you to go visit our website, LouisvilleFilmSociety.org. We have a donate link at the top of the page. Of course, we love bringing these Filmmaker Forums to you absolutely free for our community, but as a nonprofit, especially during these times where we have limited events and fundraising we can do, even if it's $5, any increment is so appreciated from our organization to you for your generosity. So if you can do that or share this as a watch party or on your page, it helps get more eyes on what we're trying to do and share with our community. We hope you all enjoy tonight. A huge thank you to Stephen Gaghan for joining us from beautiful sunny Southern California. And we will see you again in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody. Be well.